Okay, so my movement is the Chicano social movement. The Chicano social movement was started in 1953 by a man named Reyes Lopez. However, the real movement started in 1967 within New Mexico, and it was primarily just the Mexican Americans that were involved, but they did have some outside help. They fought for farm workers, they fought for students in education, they fought for culture, media, politics, everything that they had issues with, which were pretty much just his pride and culture. So Reyes Lopez started the movement in 1953 with the La Alianza Federal de Mercedes, or the Federal Land Grant Alliance. He was the one that started that and then kind of handed it over to Rodolfo Gonzalez, or Corky, Cesar Chavez, and Dolores Huerta. Rudolph, he started the meaning of Chicano with his famous poem Yo Soy Jacqueline, or I Am Jacqueline. Cesar Chavez, he dedicated his life calling it the La Causa, or the cause. And then Dolores Huerta, she started many different movements, and she held many different programs and stuff like that. So they demanded a couple of different things that all really had to do with the treatment of their culture. When the US bought Mexico, or bought part of Mexico, they named it New Mexico, and they said that they would make those citizens US citizens as well as pay them for living there. However, that never happened, and they were not ever paid. So they fought to have those land grants reinstated. They also fought for farm workers because the conditions were absolutely terrible. There was no protection from the pesticides that they were using. There was no breaks, running water, running plumbing, and overall, they were getting paid little to nothing for working 12 to 14-hour days. Um, Also, the students were not getting work on their grade levels, so they were being taught things that were either way above or way below where they were at in academics. They also did not get the correct supplies, the correct books that they needed, and there was no education set for the Mexican Americans. They also did not have any kind of voting rights. They did not have any kind of Mexican American officials in politics, so their right to vote was not anybody's um, concern. And also, the media kind of stereotyped them in a very negative way, which they also wanted to fight. So they tried to file a couple of legal cases for the reinstatement of the land grants. However, they were not as successful. So they decided to embrace who they were, embrace their culture, teach people about it. And they also held protests and strikes and boycotts against the schools that the students were at, the politics. They held many, many, many different protests against politics, and they also held strikes and boycotts against places that bought in from the employers of the farm workers. They stopped working. They pretty much just said that they were not going to be involved in that anymore. So they were finally able to get the farm workers contracts, which instated that the conditions for working would be improved. They would be getting the correct amount of breaks, the correct plumbing, and also running water and protection from the pesticides. They also started the multilingual, multicultural programs in schools, and they hired Mexican American teachers inside the school systems. They also were able to correct the education for Mexican Americans and make sure that they were getting the right amount of education, supplies, books, because, like I said before, they were not getting the correct books and all of that. So they were able to get the money to be able to give them books and stuff. Also, Mexican Americans were finally able to be elected as officials. And so we now share that. We share many of these different social changes that probably would not have been fought for if this movement was not a movement. So there were no known social workers. However, this was around the time that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Was doing his advocacy for Black Americans, and so they kind of went hand in hand, but they were not connected in any way. And I chose this movement because it is not taught in schools. There is no education against or for this movement. And so most people do not know that this movement was even a movement rather than exist. Also, they pretty much affected the whole US. I say the world because different countries took on some of the policies that we were able to reinstate in the US. Schools were able to put in the multilingual programs. Work in politics was also changed because of this program or because of this movement. And here are my references.